This video will be on the circulatory system, and the main function of it is to just transport nutrients, wastes, and other compounds like hormones. And what keeps this system going is the heart. So like we said, this helps us transport nutrients. And one source of these nutrients would be from your intestine. So there is some part of your intestine, and here are the cells that line your intestine. Let's say here is, a carbohydrate that we just digested. Now it can pass through these cells because it's the right size. But now, how would this glucose, how would we get it, to tissue, all the way elsewhere, not near the intestine, like the brain, for example? How are we going to get glucose to the brain? And the answer is with the circulatory system. So it enters, and there is a signal to give glucose to the brain. But it doesn't have to be, the brain specifically. It could just be, any tissue that requires nutrients. And what keeps this system going, like we said, is the heart. It just acts as a pump. So anatomically it looks like this. We have two major vessels going in there, and then we also have this vessel coming out like this. All right. So three types of vessels are arteries, veins, and capillaries. There do exist, smaller ones, but we'll just talk about these three for now. So the red here, these are arteries, and the tissue drop-off, the nutrient drop-off doesn't occur here because these are too thick. So arteries are, too thick to allow nutrient diffusion. Too thick to allow nutrient diffusion. And also to pick up waste, this can't happen either. The artery is eventually going to start branching off, and it gets smaller every time it branches off. So now it's getting smaller, it's getting thinner, it's getting thinner, it's getting thinner. And now we have reached the next type of blood vessel called capillaries. And these guys, are thin enough to allow diffusion of nutrients and wastes. So near capillaries, we can have, we have some cells that line these capillaries, maybe not so big. But here we can pick up things like oxygen. So luckily this cell gets oxygen. And these are also where we can dump out wastes. So CO2, for example. And now we're no longer oxygenated blood. As you can see, we dumped out the oxygen. So here, veins, these guys carry deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. And now we're going to return to the heart. So the veins eventually converge to larger veins, which will eventually converge to two large veins, and then we're eventually going to reach our heart. Okay. So we're first going to start off with the right side of circulation. Now, before that, let me orient you guys. If you were to look at a human from a ventral view, this here would be the human's right side, and this normally right is the human's left side. Okay, we mentioned before we have, veins bringing blood back to the heart, and we have two large veins that bring blood to the first chamber on the right side. So these veins here, they're called the vena cava. And this one here brings blood from below the heart. This brings blood from veins above the heart. So to be more specific, this one here, this is called the inferior vena cava. Inferior because it's below in relation to the superior vena cava. Okay, this first chamber that we bring it to, we know it's on the right side, and this one here is called the right atrium. Okay. So now we have deoxy blood. We have just entered the heart for the first time. Okay. So the next step is blood in this chamber is going to travel down into the next chamber. This here we call the right ventricle. So both are going to bring blood down here. And now we're actually going to leave the heart because the goal is to pick up oxygen. Where does that happen? That happens in the lungs. So let me erase this for a sec so I can make some room. So erase this. So now we're actually going to leave the heart. So this tube here, we don't go to the left side first, we're going to leave the heart first. Okay. And now this large structure, we can call this the pulmonary, which refers to the lungs, pulmonary trunk. And once we start branching off to, even smaller veins, now we can give this a different name. We can call these, pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries. So notice here that these are called arteries even though they carry deoxygenated blood. Here's a one switch up of this naming convention. So just keep that in mind. Even though this still carries deoxy blood, we still call this an artery. Okay, so now we are going to the lungs. So to the lungs we go. To the lungs. So we have come to the right ventricle. We're not going to the left side just yet. We are exiting and we're going to the lungs first. All right. Okay, we're going to reach a structure called the alveoli. But first, let's do a quick recap. Our first vessel we talked was the vena cava. Then we hit the right atrium, so RA. Then we hit the right ventricle. Then we hit the pulmonary trunk. Then we hit the pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries. And now we are finally in the lungs. So now we are in the lungs. And the structure, the site of this gas exchange, we call alveoli. And they are like these little sacs, extremely, extremely small. And they are surrounded by capillaries, which we've discussed before. So there is my capillary network. So all these vessels right here, again, are carrying deoxygenated blood. And they might be also carrying some wastes too. Namely, we'll talk about CO2, which is a byproduct of our metabolism. Okay, so this is where, here's CO2. Because these capillaries are thin enough, they can diffuse into the alveoli, and then we are going to breathe out this waste product. So this is going to exit the body. Exit the body via your respiratory system. Very similarly, we breathe in O2, and this is where we absorb that O2. And this comes from the environment. Comes from the environment. Okay, so now we are no longer deoxy blood. We are now good, fresh, oxygenated blood. So now we can return back to the heart. And the first vessel that we pass is kind of the opposite of this guy. We call them pulmonary veins. So again, don't get confused by the name. This one carries oxygenated blood. Pulmonary veins. And now we are going to hit the left side of circulation. left side of circulation. Okay, again, let me orient ourselves. This is the human's right, looking ventrally. This is the human's left. And I'm only going to draw the lung for the left side, so I don't, draw too many things in one picture. So here would be my pulmonary arteries bringing blood to the left side of the heart. The first chamber we hit, we call this the left atrium. Left atrium. And don't forget there's also a pulmonary artery coming from the right side, but again, to not, put too many things in one image, I'm not going to complete that. So now we have blood coming in from both sides. And just like on the right side, next stop is down. It's going to travel down. Okay, so one interesting thing about this structure, this is the left ventricle. This is the left ventricle. Left ventricle has a, extremely thick muscular wall compared to the right ventricle. And why is this left ventricle extremely thick? Thick with muscle. And that's because after the left ventricle, this blood is going to leave, bring fresh blood to all tissue in our body. So it needs a lot of strength to create the pressure, to bring blood to the rest of the body. So bring blood to the body. So now let's explain why this left wall is super muscular. Okay, so it's more muscular, which translates to a stronger contraction. More fibers, more contraction, stronger contraction. Now this allows us to get blood to all of our tissue, get fresh O2 blood to all tissue. So if you think of your extremities, that includes the head. We also have to give it to, to your fingers, and other extremities, including the toes. So you need enough force, and that force is generated partly because of the strong muscular wall. And this vessel here that exits from the left ventricle, we call this the aorta. It's a very large blood vessel. Okay, that is the left side of circulation. Okay, now let's kind of recap what we have, and how do we, what's the difference between pulmonary and systemic? Okay, so let's see. We have the right atrium goes to the right ventricle. Then we go to the pulmonary trunk. Then we go to the pulmonary, artery. And now we hit the lungs. So for pulmonary circulation, this is our reference point. Okay, let's see what we have after this. So now we have the pulmonary vein. Now we have the left atrium and the left ventricle. And this is eventually going to go, this is eventually going to leave the body. But this part here, this is, to the lungs. Again, our reference point is the lungs. And this part here, this whole chunk would be away from lungs. So we call this pulmonary, which means lungs, pulmonary circulation. And after this, we are going to go to all the tissue in our body. So we're going to say, the rest of your body. Here's going to be the reference point for the second part. And this is eventually going to go back. It's going to lose its oxygen. It's going to go to the vena cava. And it's going to hit this. So here is the second. You can think of your body as a system. So we call this part systemic circulation, to the body. So this is to the body, and this part is away from body. Away from body or away from the system.